Welcome back! My name is Baller Scuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1986. Today, we're going to talk about some honorable mentions of 1986. On April 7th, 1986, Amstrad, a British computer manufacturer most well known for their Amstrad CPC computer, purchased the Sinclair Research's computer product range and the rights to the Sinclair brand. This cost Amstrad £5 million, roughly $21 million in 2025. Sinclair Research was best known for the ZX Spectrum. The successful ZX Spectrum would now be manufactured and distributed by Amstrad. In 1986, Mirrorsoft published Dynamite Dan II, Dr. Blitzen and Islands of Arcanum to British computers. Designed by Rob Bowkett, Dynamite Dan II is a platform game and sequel to Dynamite Dan. Critics at the time were positive about the game. On April 14, 1986, Apple discontinued the Macintosh 512K. The Macintosh 512K, or Fat Mac, was originally released on September 10, 1984, but had not been particularly successful. This was replaced by the Macintosh 512KE. The Macintosh 512KE was considered an upgrade to the Macintosh 512K, including the double-sided disk drive included with the Macintosh Plus. It sold for $2,000, just under $5,800 in 2025. In 1986, Imagine Software released Movie to British computers. Written by Duško Dimitrijević, Movie is an adventure game. The player plays as Jack Marlowe, a private investigator in 1930s New York. His goal is to enter the headquarters of mob boss Bugs Malloy to retrieve an audio tape. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In April 1986, Jaleco ported Ninja JaJaMaru-kun to Japanese arcades. Released as a part of Nintendo's Versus system, the port would only be moderately successful. Jaleco would also port the game to Japanese computers in 1986. This version would not be particularly successful. In 1986, Elite Systems released Scooby-Doo to British computers. Designed by Greg Folis and Roy Carter of Gargoyle Games, Scooby-Doo, also known as Scooby-Doo and the Castle Mystery, is an action game. Advertising as the first ever computer cartoon, the game was received well by critics at the time. On April 16, 1986, Bandai released GeGeGe no Kitaro, Yokai Daimakyo, or GeGeGe no Kitaro, the Evil Yokai Realm, to the Famicom. Developed by Toze, the game is a platform game. The player plays as Kitaro from the manga series GeGeGe no Kitaro. The player must go to different sections of the map, going through side-scrolling missions, defeating enemies and mini-bosses to collect a scroll before defeating the final boss. The game would be popular in Japan, selling 1.25 million copies. In 1986, Durrell Software released Thanatos to British computers. Designed by Mike Richardson and programmed by Rod Barrington with music by Julian Breeze, Thanatos is an action game. The player plays as the dragon Thanatos the Destroyer. Thanatos must rescue the sorceress Eros from the evil lord of the underworld. Then, Thanatos must take Eros back to her spellbook so she can complete a spell to bring enlightenment to the land. Critics at the time loved the game. On April 25, 1986, Konami ported Gradius to the Famicom. Because of the hardware limitations, many of the levels had to be redesigned, and the player had to be limited to just 2 options. A cheat code was also added to this version of the game, giving the player almost all the power-ups at once. This was the first instance of what would be known as the Konami code: up, up, down, down, left, right, BA. The Famicom version of Gradius would be very popular. In 1986, Konami released Yie Ar Kung Fu 2 to Japanese computers. Yie Ar Kung Fu 2 is a beat-em-up. In this sequel to Yie Ar Kung Fu, the player plays as Lee Young. Li Young's father had defeated the Chop Suey gang, but one member survived and declared himself Emperor Yi Ga. Now Li Young must defeat Yi Ga and his gang once and for all. On April 27, 1986, Activision released Alter Ego to American computers. Designed by Peter J. Favreau, Alter Ego is a simulation game. The player takes control of a person's life, either male or female depending on which version was purchased, making decisions that will impact that person's life. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time, who typically found the game humorous. In 1986, Steve Jackson Games released the first edition of the Generic Universal Role-Playing System, or GURPS. Designed by Steve Jackson, GURPS is a tabletop role-playing game system that allows for gaming in any setting. Steve Jackson had created gaming systems for other games in the past, wanting to break away from the standard fantasy system that had been created by Dungeons & Dragons. In the GURPS system, players are given a number of points when creating their characters. These points can be spent on the character's strength, dexterity, intelligence, and health. This will then determine the player's secondary characteristics, such as hit points, will, perception, and fatigue points. Using this system, as well as 6-sided dice rolls, the players and the game master can create a world in any setting that follows rules flexible enough for hopefully any situation. On April 30th, 1986, Square released Cruise Chaser Blassty to Japanese computers. Designed by Hironobu Sakaguchi and Kazuhiko Aoki, with music by Takashi Uno and Nobuo Uematsu, Cruise Chaser Blassty is a role-playing game. The player controls a customizable mecha robot. The robot must fly through space, battling enemy spaceships and enemy mecha, hoping to win a war for either the commune or the rebel inverse. The game's story would be adapted into a manga. In 1986, Access Software released Leaderboard to American computers. Designed by Bruce and Roger Carver, Leaderboard is a golf simulation game. The game has 4 different courses for the player to play. The game was popular and was reviewed well by the critics. On May 12, 1986, Paramount Pictures released Top Gun to theaters. Top Gun is an action film directed by Tony Scott. Starring Tom Cruise, the film follows Lieutenant Pete Maverick Mitchell. Maverick, along with his friend Goose, are given the opportunity to train at the U.S. Navy's Fighter Weapons School, known as Top Gun, where most of the film takes place. The film was very successful, the highest-grossing film of 1986. Critics, however, had mixed reviews for the film. The film would spawn a video game. Released in 1986 by Ocean Software for British computers, the video game, simply named Top Gun, is a flight simulation game. The player controls a fighter plane with the view of their and the enemy's cockpit on the screen. The player must defeat 3 enemy planes, one at a time, to make it to the next level. The game was successful, selling over 500,000 copies. Critics at the time had relatively positive opinions on the game, typically seeing the game as fun, but basic. In 1986, Nihon Falcom released Romancia to Japanese computers. Featuring music from Takahito Abe, Yuzo Koshiro, and Masatomo Miyamoto, Romancia is an action role-playing game. The player plays as Prince Fan Freddy, who must rescue Princess Selena within 30 minutes. Critics at the time were not happy with the game. In May 1986, Atari released the Atari 7800. The Atari 7800 was the 3rd major home console released by Atari. The console itself was designed by General Computer Corporation. General Computer Corporation had been responsible for Ms. Pac-Man. Since then, they worked with Atari to develop several games for the Atari 2600 and Atari 5200, as well as a few arcade games. The Atari 7800 was designed in 1983 and 1984 with an intended release date of June 1984, known then as the Atari 3600. But the takeover of Atari by Tramiel Technology postponed the release of the console. The Atari 7800 uses a customized MMOs Technology 6502 processor, known as the Atari Sally, has 4 kilobytes of RAM and 48 kilobytes of ROM space on the cartridges. It is more powerful than the Famicom in some ways, but less powerful in others. Unlike the Atari 5200, though, the 7800 would be able to play Atari 2600 games without the need for an add-on. When the Atari 7800 was released, it sold for $79.95, over $230 in 2025. Despite having announced 13 games for the console in 1984, the 7800 launched with just 8 games. Those were Asteroids, Centipede, Dig Dug, Food Fight, Joust, Ms. Pac-Man, Pole Position 2, and Robotron 2084. Pole Position 2 would be the pack-in game for the console. While the original release dates of many Atari 7800 games are difficult to pinpoint, it is assumed that by the end of 1986, only Galaga and Xevious were added to that list, bringing the total number of games for the Atari 7800 to just 10, all of them ports of arcade games. The most recent arcade game, Food Fight, came out in 1983, 3 years earlier. As a result, sales of the Atari 7800 were slow. By the end of 1986, Atari sold under 100,000 Atari 7800 consoles. The console seemed doomed to failure. Atari also finalized their legal issues with Swordquest by 1986. When we last left off, Atari had held the contests for 3 of the Swordquest titles, awarding the prizes for the first 2 titles. The third contest, the one for Waterworld, was said by lawyers to be required by the company. It is said that Atari secretly invited those with the correct entries for a final round, and the Crown of Life was awarded to an anonymous person. However, the fourth game, Airworld, was cancelled. As a result, Atari would compensate the other winners to make up for the lack of future contests. The first 2 winners, Stephen Bell for Earthworld and Michael Rideout for Fireworld, were awarded an additional $15,000 each, over $43,000 in 2025, as well as an Atari 7800 as compensation. The 10 finalists in the contest for Waterworld were each given $2,000, just under $5,800 in 2025. The fate of the Philosopher's Stone, the prize for Airworld, and the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery, the grand prize, remains a mystery. Those close to the matter have suggested that the prizes were returned to the manufacturer and melted down to their base components, but rumors of what happened to the prizes spread quickly, including that Jack Tramiel kept the prizes for himself. In 1986, Melbourne House released Fist 2: The Legend Continues to British computers. Developed by Beam Software, Fist 2 is a scrolling adventure game. The sequel to The Way of the Exploding Fist, the game did not sell nearly as well as the original. On May 20th, 1986, Tecmo released Rygar to Japanese arcades. Rygar is a platform game. The player plays as a legendary warrior who must battle with a shield with a long chain attached to it known as the disc armor. The warrior's goal is to defeat the monsters led by the evil Rygar. In 1986, The Edge released Bobby Bearing to British computers. Designed by Robert and Trevor Figgins, Bobby Bearing is an action-adventure game. The player plays as Bobby Bearing, a ball bearing, who must rescue his 4 lost brothers and his cousin. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. Throughout June 1986, Nintendo would port several of their Famicom games to the NES. Most of these games were ported with few to no changes. On June 1st, Nintendo ported Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. to the NES. On June 6th, Nintendo ported Donkey Kong 3 and Donkey Kong Jr. Math to the NES. Sometime in June 1986, Nintendo ported Mario Bros. And Popeye to the NES. Finally, on June 18th, Nintendo ported Balloon Fight to the NES. Keep in mind that at this point, the NES was still only released in small limited releases across the United States and had not been officially fully released. In 1986, Ocean Software released The Great Escape to British computers. Developed by Denton Designs, The Great Escape is an adventure game. The player plays as a prisoner of war in 1942 Germany. The player's goal is to escape from the POW camp. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On June 13, 1986, Activision acquired Infocom. Infocom had been struggling for several years. It is said that while Infocom was known for their interactive fiction games, the founders always wanted to make serious business software. Inspired by the success of Lotus 1-2-3, which had made Lotus development almost 9 times the amount that Infocom made in 1983, Infocom pooled their resources to create Cornerstone. Cornerstone, released in 1985, is a relational database software. It required a huge investment to develop, including hiring dozens of employees, so that Infocom had over 100 employees and had to borrow enormous amounts of money from venture capitalists. When Cornerstone was released, it was reviewed well, with many critics calling it the best relational database software on the market. However, the software would be slow when performing complicated tasks due to it functioning on a virtual machine, similar to how the interactive fiction games were programmed. It was also only compatible with IBM PCs. The downturn of the business computer industry in 1985 and the $495 price tag, over $1,400 in 2025, reduced the software's sales. It sold just 10,000 copies. Infocom would reduce the price tag to $100, under $290 in 2025, and removed the copy protection to try to increase sales, but it did not work. After Cornerstone was released, Infocom laid off half of its employees. On top of that, Infocom's interactive fiction sales also started to decline. In 1984, it was estimated that of the 1.8 million home computers in America, 500,000 homes had purchased Infocom games. However, the market was moving to graphic adventure games. Infocom was hesitant to add graphics to its games, seeing it as too difficult to add to the Z Machine engine. Instead, Infocom started releasing advertisements mocking graphical games as graffiti when compared to the human imagination. For a while, this was successful, leading to other companies also creating text adventure games. But by 1986, Infocom had failed to recover from the downturns and were unable to pay their loans. Activision CEO, Jim Levy, was a fan of Infocom games and pushed for a merger between the two companies. Activision would acquire the company for $7.5 million, over $21 million in 2025. With the acquisition, Activision would own the rights to the Zork trilogy, Deadline, the Enchanter trilogy, Planetfall, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Wishbringer, and Trinity, as well as the other titles released by Infocom. In 1986, Gargoyle Games released Heavy on the Magic to British computers. Designed by Greg Fullis and Royston Carter, with music by Mark Time, Heavy on the Magic is an adventure game. The player plays the wizard Axel the Able. Axel must escape from the dungeons in the castle Culloden's Pile. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time. On June 13, 1986, Capcom ported Ghosts and Goblins to the Famicom. Programmed by Micronix, this version of the game would be the first Famicom game to use a new 128KB cartridge, allowing for more room for the game. Also in June 1986, Konami ported Ghosts and Goblins to British computers. The Famicom version of the game would be popular. In 1986, Hewson Consultants released Quasitron to the ZX Spectrum. Designed by Steve Turner of Graftgold, Quasitron is an action game. The player plays as KLP-2, or Klepto, whose goal is to destroy the other robot on the planet Quartek. Designed as a Spectrum version of Paradroid, the game was reviewed well by critics at the time. In June 1986, Data East released Side Pocket to Japanese arcades. Side Pocket is a billiards game. The game is primarily played as a straight pool game, although 9-ball is available for 2 players. The game was reviewed well by critics at the time and would be relatively successful. The consensus was that this was the most realistic billiards game on the market. On June 26, 1986, Jaleco ported Choplifter to the Famicom. This version of the game is based on the arcade remake made by Sega. It would not be particularly successful. On June 27, 1986, TriStar Pictures released Labyrinth to theaters. Directed by Jim Henson and starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly, Labyrinth is a musical fantasy film. It follows teenager Sarah, who wishes her infant half-brother Toby away. Jareth, the Goblin King, takes Toby away to the center of an otherworldly maze, and Sarah must go on a quest to rescue Toby. The film was not successful at the box office and received mixed reviews from critics, but it would become a cult classic. Activision released a game to go along with the film. Developed by Lucasfilm Games, Labyrinth the computer game was released to American and Japanese computers. It was designed by David Fox and Douglas Adams, with art from Gary Winnick and Ken Macklin, and music from Russell Lieblich. In the game, the player will create a character, then lead their character to watch Labyrinth in theaters. Jareth will then transport the player to the labyrinth, and it is up to the player to find and destroy Jareth in time. The game would be successful commercially, with relatively positive reviews from critics. In the second quarter of 1986, Quantum Link released Habitat online. Habitat is a graphical multi-user dungeon, or MUD. The game was directed by Chip Morningstar, produced by Steve Arnold, designed by Randy Farmer, and programmed by Eric Wilmunder and Janet Hunter, with art by Gary Winnick. It would be developed by Lucasfilm Games as well as Quantum Link. Quantum Link is a service for the Commodore 64, allowing players to connect to computers remotely to play the game. In Habitat, which was released in a beta test, players would be represented through on-screen avatars. They would move around the game, speaking and interacting with other players. The creators believed that this interaction between the players would drive the game. Since players would need to barter for resources, players would be robbed and sometimes killed for them, leading to rules, regulations, and authority figures starting to appear in the game, all created by players. That will do it for the honorable mentions of 1986 for now. My name is Baller Scuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we destroy some towns.